Hello, Ihsan. Welcome to the Spiritual Context Podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, to get us started, I want to give you a prompt and you can take it whichever direction you want. So, the prompt is I heard God laughing. What does that mean to you and how does that fit into your life?
Okay. Well, let's start with a personal experience and go from there. Because before I say that, the idea of hearing God laughing is something that I think is actually really central to the Sufi expression of the spiritual path. So let me just start with that, because there is something about lightening and loosening and not having such a tight grip on our ideas of what we think is supposed to happen and the shape that it's supposed to take if we're following all the prescribed steps. So for me, this phrase, I heard God laughing, it goes back to a time when I was in my mid-20s. I had just returned to the United States after living abroad for about 10 years. And I was having quite a difficult time. And on a personal level, I was in the midst of not even recovering yet, but feeling the full scale effects of a deeper injury that I had sustained years earlier. It was a traumatic brain injury. And this moment that I'm going to talk about was really one of those dark night kinds of moments where I had come back to the United States. As I said, I'd been living abroad. I felt like a real outsider at that point. I had lived in Canada for a period of time with my family. I'd gone to university there, then I'd gone on to Japan, and I really felt a separation from living in the United States. And so this was just a couple of months after I had come back, and nothing seemed to be working. I couldn't find a really good job at that point. It was right after 9/11 happened. I was having a difficult time with the relationship that I was really investing in heavily, and it wasn't working. And I just had this night of absolute despair. It really felt like everything in me was just falling into this black hole. And it felt like I was falling and falling and falling and falling. And at one point, I actually rolled off of my bed onto the floor. And it was the middle of the night. And I was just so miserable and just writhing on the floor and just asking why is it like this? Why does it have to be like this? And at the very lowest point of that, I just swung my arm down to the floor, slapped the floor hard, and it hit something. And I was surprised by that because I didn't remember there being something there. And it was dark. So I turned the light on and it happened to be a book by the Sufi poet Hafiz. And the title was I Heard God Laughing. And there's something that happened. Now, this is a book that I didn't fully understand it. I don't know if I would say I fully understand it even now. Maybe I understand it much more. But at that time, it was something I was really just exploring. But seeing that title at that moment of despair, it released something. And there was this kind of insane laughter that erupted out of me. And then that was quickly followed by sobs and snot and just this full body response of weeping and laughing and feeling somehow like it's going to be okay. I don't understand what this means, but somehow I'm held. And the final piece of that experience was that shortly before that happened, right before this thing where I slapped the book cover in the dark, I'd been visualizing this sensation of what was happening for me, and And what it felt like is that I had fallen down the deepest, darkest well that you could imagine. So dark and deep that looking up to the top of the mouth of the well looked like just a little tiny pinprick of light, like a very distant star. That's how deep down and dark it felt. And so to have that kind of release at that moment, that turned on something in me that continued to stay turned on ever since. So
it wasn't just a momentary, just that night, but it has been with you, whatever happened that night.
yes, I would even go so far as to say that it was a moment of a almost like a stage curtain being lifted. It revealed something about myself that I don't know if I could have put into words at that time, but it gave me something of a kind of clarity and a kind of certainty that I had not had before. And so that led me into a much deeper exploration from that point. So yeah, that's maybe enough to say about that to get us going.
Yeah. And we can talk more about Hafiz in a little bit. When I hear I heard God laughing, I think this particular poem that I'm thinking, Tripping Over with Joy, is in that compilation, in that collection of poems, which I love a lot. But I want to talk more specifically about this term I heard. So you do a interview series called Walking with Wisdom with others in your community. And I was listening to that in preparation for today, and I heard the term Endarkenment. I think I'm saying it correctly. So
Yeah.
we often hear of enlightenment, but what is Endarkenment and how does that relate with your experience that night?
Good question. So Endarkenment, this is something that came from the conversation with my very dear friend Lynn Raphael Reed, and I want to make sure I credit her with that as well. But this is something that is also very central to my own experience, and it's an important thing for me, both in a personal context and then also in this broader kind of communal spiritual context that this conversation happened. So Endarkenment, in this case, so we as you said, we talk a lot about enlightenment, and it's a very Western idea to continue to be reaching, and by Western I mean I could go to Western Asia as well. This is something that extends out kind of from east to west, going all the way back to the early Egyptians, the ancient Greeks. This idea of ascent, it's a very old idea. And that's somewhat where this idea of enlightenment comes from, is this upward, outward reach, as if things are always growing toward or reaching toward something higher. And we could call that higher the divine, we could call it God, however we want to use terminology is kind of irrelevant to this, but it's that reach out. It's the being more of what is real. And so Endarkenment it's not just a flip side of that, and it's not just an opposite, because it's not really an opposite at all. It's a little bit like the notion that James Hillman talks about in his acorn theory, as he calls it, this idea of growing down versus growing up. There's something a little bit analogous to that. Endarkenment is the inward reach rather than the outward reach. And so much of our ideas about enlightenment take us out of ourselves. They take us away from ourselves. They take us towards something. And that's fine. But there's also this very necessary inward movement that's required. And so often, as happens in the body with the healing process, you can see it with animals, darkness and healing actually come together. So there's something about a healing movement in the Endarkenment. It's welcoming that, it's moving toward it rather than shying away from it. You could think of it, if you want to, in terms of, I like to think of it this way, in terms of the Grail legends, for example, of King Arthur and all of the cycles of romantic poetry around that, where the critical element is actually the asking of the healing question to the ailing king, and that's what releases the healing power of the Grail. It's something like that. There is this. It's a tender, compassionate reach into the places that we would typically not want to look at because they hurt. They might feel damaged. There might be scars. But that's actually where the richest material of our own personal development is to be found. So we have to move both ways.
Right. A few things come to mind. One, I teach a class called Spiritual Care, and we try to define spirituality in the class together. But I start with the question, what is the deepest thought you've ever had, to the students? And they begin to think about, what is a deep thought? What is a deep experience? What is a deep question? And we become suddenly aware that there is a dimension of depth, right? That's always there. And so one way we talk about spirituality is the deepest questions, the deepest thoughts that we have, or the deepest experience, or the deepest layers of our being. But then the next day I ask them, what is the highest experience you've ever had? And then we can talk about spirituality also as a height, as the heights of our being, heights of ourself, as the greatest potential that we are capable of. But you're also invoking the Jungian idea. I think Jung talks about this, that entering where we least want to enter, going where we least want to go, and there we find the treasure. And that's that we find a lot in a lot of our mythology too. That's
Right.
where we find the treasure. And it's also how we relate to our suffering, you're saying, how we relate to the places that hurt. And that reminds me of the Rumi poem. I think the poem goes, what's in your heart, and sorrow, and stay with it, something to that effect. And because the wound is the place where the light enters.
That's right.
Is that
Yeah.
also what you're referring to, the ability
Absolutely.
to stay
Yeah.
with hurt?
Yes. It's that. I mean, I like that contrast you introduced with your students of height and depth, because they're not opposites. I mean, if you really are looking at they're not. They don't oppose each other in any way. They are absolutely able to work together in our development and nurturing our inner experience. And yeah, that I think it reminds me of there's the song that's I'm forgetting how it goes. Anyway, it's the crack where the lights come in. Anyway, but yeah, that is definitely how it moves in a lot of cases. Is you see that there is this enlightenment that happens through an endarkening experience or a period of time. I mean, take Saint John of the Cross. You know, he has one of the most well-known pieces that we still refer to, just in sort of casual parlance these days. You know, the dark night of the soul. We talk about it like, oh, you know, the dark night of the soul. But if you actually go back to what he was writing about there, it was excruciating. He was literally being tortured by fellow priests because he fell outside of the orthodox way of expressing himself during the Spanish Inquisition. He had a mystical way of understanding his experience with the divine presence. And his poem is about that. It's about his reflection of coming out of that incredibly painful, physically painful, mentally painful, spiritually painful time where he felt so isolated from everything that he valued, except for his commitment to what he would have called the presence of God. But he also felt isolated and distant from that. And one of his reflections on that is that the shadows are the darkest and the deepest when you're closest to the divine light, because the contrast is so extreme. And so when you're closest, and this gets to some of the questions about longing, belonging, loneliness, it's all related to that same kind of thing, that, as he was saying there, when you're closest to that divine source, it actually can feel like you're furthest.
Oh, I had a number of questions, but now I'm blanking with that. That's really beautiful. Uh, Let me ask you an issue that we run into in our class. I remember all my questions now. The first one was, so in my class we talk about height, we talk about depth, but then I bring up the question: we can imagine someone having a deep experience, right? Like you had a deep, traumatic, like hitting bottom kind of experience. And in some cases, it happens that people hit bottom and then they turn around. A switch flips over and they turn around and suddenly they see the light. But it often also happens that people hit bottom and they don't turn around. It turns them very, very bitter and resentful, and darkness really takes them over. What do you think makes that crucial difference?
I'll speak from experience. What made it possible for me, because I'm not claiming that I never had those periods of resentment or bitterness or any of that. Of course I did. I went through times of that. I went through very dark times in my own life. But what allowed me to come out of those times was, I mean, it's almost a little overdone to use this word, but surrender is the first word that just came to mind. But there's more that comes with that. There's a relaxing. And that's one of the skills that's actually necessary to what you might call progress along a spiritual path. I mean, that sounds very formal to say it that way, but relaxing on an existential level. So stop holding the tension artificially. The fact is we're always, as human beings, in a state of tension of some kind. And we can go into this because there's a lot to say about that. But much of the time, what we're doing when we're resisting whatever movement is being offered to us, and that's where I would say the bitterness and resentment and shutdown come from, is we're not allowing the new thing that's trying to be born, that's trying to come into us and through us. And what I had in my own experience is I had this injury. It changed how my brain works. So I had a lot of cognitive shuffling that was happening. It changed how the rest of my body works. So physiologically, hormonally, I had a lot of pain with it. I had physical injury from it. So there was healing and there was chronic pain and all sorts of things like that. Where I struggled, where I suffered, is when I identified with those hurts, or when I identified with what I believed should have happened or who I had been prior to that. And so what I mean by the invitation is I wasn't asking what else is here. I wasn't asking the question, what wants to happen, which is something that's actually a really vital question. And until I learned to do that, and the process of learning to ask questions like that, and then to really listen to the answers from my own life, from my own body, and find out, what are they trying to say to me? What is actually being said to me right now? How am I being spun into being at this moment? It's things like that help to make that turn. And the turn it's not a rebound. It's not just, a Newtonian bounce of a ball where you have an opposite and equal reaction. It's gradual a lot of times. It might be punctuated equilibrium where you have very little change for long periods of time, and then bam, all of a sudden you're hit with this wake up if you're paying attention. So there's a lot of peeling back, a lot of relaxing into what is actually here right now. That's where it begins.
So surrender, as in the willingness to allow the process to unfold. And
surrender, yes. Yeah, I'm going to pick your words apart a second there.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually, in a sense, giving up the idea that you're willing anything. And so you've there are a lot of classic formulations of this that are often put in Old English kind of speech, like "not my will, but thy will." That's the sort of energy that I'm talking about. Is it isn't about what I'm making happen or willing into new being. It's a recognition. That's the key word, actually. It's a recognition.
I'd say experientially, yes. In my own case, when I have hit bottom, that's how I would describe it. But on the other hand, from the perspective of someone who is in the midst of it, in the thick of it, and they're asking, what can I do? If the answer is there's nothing you can do, it's like, or stop. Yeah. Say
there
more.
Is something there is that. So this is the paradox that will keep coming up, is that when we start wandering into sort of the spiritualized language, we very quickly hit paradox. And so, because on one hand, what we could say is, that's right, there is nothing you can do. You are the problem here. It's actually, you are the obstacle. That's going back to Hafiz for a second. That's one of the lines that he says is, you are your own obstacle. Rise above yourself. And that's a little bit like, it reminds me of something, Alan Watts. Okay, he would always question this idea of self-improvement, because the problem is it's the same self who's doing the improving as needs improvement. So how does that happen? Okay, so it's a little bit like that. We run up against that. But in this case, what can you do? You can stop fighting. You can stop straining against this invisible barrier or this invisible force that seems to be holding you down. And I can share something that was a very dramatic experience of that I had at one point, if we get there. But you can relax. You can release your grip, sometimes physically, even looking at your hands and just saying, what are they doing? Am I holding fists tightly right now? Are my glutes tight? Are my feet tight? And so you can go right into your body and start having an experience of that relax and let go and find your breath again. These are things that people have pointed us to for thousands of years. They still hold true, because that's the first step, is re-inhabiting your physicality. And by doing so, you actually gain access to your senses again. You gain access to your perceptions again. And those start to feed into your nervous system and all of the intricate ways that you interpret the signals of what's going on everywhere around you. And you can actually start to communicate with it again, instead of being so tightly wound up into this knot that just seems like it can't get any tighter or harder or smaller, So
would you share your experience that you just referred to?
Sure. It this was I think it was in 2014. I was on a whitewater rafting trip with my wife and in a group, and we were on the Green River that passes through northwestern Colorado into Utah. And it wasn't supposed to be anything that dramatic. I mean, we were going to hit some maybe class 3, class 4 rapids here and there. But it's not the most technical river that you could do. So it was more of a float most of the time. But on the very first day, as we launched into the water, we decided to get into a 2-person kayak instead of the big rafts, because we like kayaking. Had been a little while since we'd done it. And so we were going along just fine for the first half hour or so, but then we hit our first rapids. And at the top of the very first rapids, we had a miscommunication about which direction we were going to take, and we paddled in opposite ways, and it spun us sideways very quickly because of the speed of the river picked up right there. So we washed up sideways against a big boulder that was in the middle of the river, capsized. She was flipped out on one side, I was flipped out on the other. And basically, Masami, my wife, she went under, but then popped right back up pretty quickly. I got pulled down into what's called a keeper's hole on the other side of the rapids. And it was like having, I, in retrospect, I think of some of the biblical stories of like Jacob or something, like wrestling the angel. It felt like I was being pinned down by some irresistibly immense force. And it took me a few seconds to realize I'm under the river, pinned down, and I can't move. And that, of course, creates some physical panic. I mean, immediately the survival instincts kick in. And I was fighting it and fighting it and fighting it. And I finally realized I still had my paddle in my hand. And so I was able to use the paddle to be a lever and push myself away from this force of water and rock that was holding me in this hole. And eventually it popped me free, but I was still at the bottom of the river. And no matter what I did, and I lost my paddle at that point, it just seemed like no matter how hard I fought, and I'm actually quite a good swimmer. I grew up in water my entire life. I taught swimming. I coached swimming. So I'm a pretty good swimmer, but I couldn't find my way up to the surface. And I realized at this point, I'd been under for quite some time and I was starting to run out of air. And more realizations started to hit me. Like, oh, this might be it. I might not make it out of this. And as I was struggling between physically fighting the current at the bottom of the river, and I'm just kind of tumbling along with it at that point, I heard what seemed like a very clear voice that said, "Stop fighting. Let go." I couldn't accept it the first time. I thought, no, hell no. I'm not going to die here. And I kept fighting, but I kept staying down. And I heard it again. It said, "Stop fighting. Let go." And at that point, I knew that it could mean more than one thing. It could mean that I'm actually surrendering to the end of my life as I know it. And I had to accept that was a real possibility at that moment. And I did. I went completely limp. I just stopped fighting. And I let go of the idea of saving myself. And almost immediately, I floated right back up to the surface. Because I still had my life preserver on. I mean, why wasn't it working before? I stopped fighting. I popped up to the surface, and the whole rafting party was far, far downriver. I'd been underwater for more than 3 minutes at that point. And they were all looking for me downstream. And here I was surfacing way upstream from them and having to, call and then catch up to them. And it was that was probably one of the most important experiences of my adult life, was to be so closely faced with both the presence and the possibility of death and the acceptance of that. And that also gave me firsthand experience with that notion of dying before you die.
Yes, I was going to ask, did it occur to you, or was there a knowingness that it could be death of the body, which you accepted, but also that it could be the death of the ego, the absolute annihilation of the sense of separate identity? Was that a possibility in your mind?
At that moment, I don't think there was any difference between those two.
Mm-hmm.
It was such a high stakes moment from a survival standpoint. I wasn't thinking much.
Mm-hmm.
It was very instinctive reaction and movement. And there was some separation of sort of a quiet inner voice that I was able to have that was almost reflective while this struggle was going on. But it wasn't like what I was aware of is the possibility of the end of me as I know me. And I don't think I had it very finely differentiated at that point. It was just, it was clear that that was an option. Yeah.
How did you, I know, I think in your biography on the Sufi Way website, you call yourself the PK, the preacher's kid. So how did you go from that to now being a Sufi teacher, a murshid? Am I saying that right, murshid?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How did I go there? Well, that's my entire life story, actually. But let me say it this way: the growing up in the church. So I was part of a very strict. My father was a minister, so I was a PK. Like I said, I was a preacher's kid. And what's funny is later on, I would meet people in my late teens, early 20s. They would say, "Oh, you're a PK." It's like, you must be a real bad boy, things like that. And I would think, was I? Maybe I was in some ways.
As a rebellion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had my own version of rebellion, certainly. But for me, just my personal experience of it was I found church life completely, it was just like this claustrophobic kind of experience for me, in part because it was a very rigid environment. There wasn't a lot of openness to anything that was different. It was very doctrinal. It was very much about saying the prayers and the creeds and all the formula pieces, and not a lot of welcomeness for questioning either, which was a strange place for my own father to be, because he was a very curious, inquisitive, and scholarly kind of person. And so he had access to the ancient Hebrew and Greek texts. He could read them in the original form, and so his understanding of that didn't really match the sort of the dynamic of this congregation. So there was always tension. I was certainly more than a little precocious. Like, I knew all of my Bible verses. I could memorize them on cue when they wanted me to, but I would ask difficult questions also, of the adults, and they didn't always appreciate that. And so I was always looking beyond. It was clear to me from a very young age that there was more than I was being told. There was obviously more, because there was a world outside of this church. I went to school. I met other kids. They didn't all have the same exact religion as me. And then that carried on to my own exploration. I was a voracious reader as a kid. I had an older brother who was very precocious, and he would drop these college reading level books, as a 12-year-old. He would read them and set them aside. I'd pick them up as a 10-year-old and try to read them. I didn't necessarily understand them, but I would always follow on. So I was reading a lot of things much sooner than normally you'd come across them. Even getting into some of like the existentialists in my early teens, and Camus was one of my favorites, all the way through and through high school. But I was always stretching. I was always reaching. And then when I was 15, my family moved to Toronto in Canada, and from suburban Denver, Colorado, which at the time was a very homogenous white kind of population at that point. Toronto, if you've ever been there, it's completely, it's the United Nations on steroids. I mean, it's everyone in the world, from every country, culture, religious tradition, some representative of that has found a way to make a community for themselves in Toronto. And so it is still the most culturally diverse city in the world. And so for me, moving there was also a very profound experience, because immediately I was going to school with people of all sorts of, backgrounds. There were 50 some languages spoken at the first school I went to there, English being a minority. So I would walk down the hallways and hear all of these different languages. I would see people dressed in their traditional clothing from all parts of the world. And that made me really curious. And when I was 16, after I'd made friends with a lot of people from different faiths and cultures, I said to my dad at one point, I was like, surely there can't just be one religion that has, you know, a chokehold on all truth and is the only one of all time that has ever been real. I mean, there are all of these other ones. I say, you know, I have all these friends. They're all good people. Certainly, they're not all wrong and you know, damned to hell simply because they don't have the same faith that I've been raised in. I mean, right. So I'm saying this to my dad, and he didn't get back to me right away. I mean, he thought about it, and then eventually he said, "Well," he said, "I think everyone who believes in a creator of some sort essentially believes in the same origin, the same God." And that alone, I mean, I don't know if I would totally agree with that statement even today, but that opened up a doorway for me. That was basically, I saw the exit sign at that point, and that's where I just said, all right, it's been really interesting, but I'm off to other adventures now. And so that really gave me the green light to go and explore, and that's what I did. Especially those years that I lived in Toronto, was I really got into experiencing other traditions. So that was something that really laid the groundwork for what later became this connection to contemporary Sufism, Western universal Sufism to be specific, which is in and of itself, especially in the school that I'm connected to, it is a big welcome mat. It is a big invitation and a big open kind of all-embracing sort of welcome to anyone who wants to explore with an open heart and sincerity about what this is and what are we and where's this going. So and there are other steps that happen in between that, but that was definitely for me the groundwork, was just knowing all of these different ways that we can express this urge, this longing for this out there, something else, something bigger, something greater beyond us. And yeah.
Your teacher, Pierre Elias,
Mm.
he defines Sufism as the self-cleaning capacity of the human heart. Could you say more about that?
Well, that's you know, that's kind of a there's more. It's simple, is what I want to say. That it's a very simple idea, but it goes so deep. So the self-cleaning capacity, I mean, if you just feel into that phrase for a moment, he has a real gift for tying complex things in very simple phrases. So this self-cleaning capacity. So if you imagine, what are we doing when we're engaging in anything that we would categorize as spiritual in some sense? And why would we need a heart that is self-cleaning? What's the cleaning that's required? What's dirty? You know, what's impure about it? And what this is getting back to is that Sufis have long talked about this idea of, you could use the word purification, although I think we take that word to too much of an extreme in English, because it immediately implies some sort of filth, or, you know, something that is shameful, that needs to be cleansed. That's not what this is saying. The kind of purification, that the self-cleaning that we're talking about, is this, it's this ability to recognize where we have become severed or fragmented from connection with this divine source. That's really what it's talking about. Rumi, Hafiz, all of these classical Sufis, they often talked about a mirror. It could be the dust that settles on a mirror can obscure the image, but the reflection, the reflective capacity of the mirror is unchanged by the dust that accumulates. And by simply wiping it clean, we have access again to that reflective capacity. So it's something along those lines of this self-cleaning capacity of the human heart. It's our innate ability. And this is what you might say, this is what is Sufi in us, in all of us. So this just is it happens to be the word we're using. Okay, other words could be substituted, but we might say that is what is Sufi in us, is that which is reflecting the reality of what is, and that we become separated from that. And so by engaging in practices of certain kinds, reflection of certain kinds, we develop that ability to wipe the dust away or lift the veils. Those are often phrases that are used. We lift the veils that are obscuring our view. So that's really in a very simple way. That's what it is. It's our innate capacity to come back consciously, get back to that idea of letting go, surrendering. There's some of that in there, but it's letting go so that we're not getting tangled up in projections and judgments and opinions, asserting that the world is or must be a certain way. I mean, that all kind of goes along with it. So we're relaxing back. We're dropping the tension. It's that word, those words that I heard under the river. Stop fighting. Just let go. And that is what allows us to come back more and more quickly as we practice it into that natural state of what we might just call loving, attentive awareness.
How did you find Sufism or settle on Sufism?
Those are two different questions, but they're good questions. The finding, I've asked this question to a lot of people in an interview kind of format. What led you to Sufism? How did you find it? And almost everybody, and I'm going to answer it in a similar way, but almost everyone has said, I didn't find it found me. And it very much felt like that from the moment of, I mean, it could be that moment in the dark of slapping the book. I heard God laughing. That was one of the little sparkling gems on the path that pointed that to me. But even from the first moment that I consciously encountered Sufism, it was actually as an undergraduate, and I was a minor in religious studies, and with a couple of friends, I had started this undergraduate religious studies association, and we took it on ourselves to create an inter-university symposium for undergraduates. I mean, there are plenty of things for professors and graduate students, but nothing for undergraduates.
You were a great student.
Well, I loved it, actually. I mean, that was part of the clue for me, is I loved it. I loved religious studies. It wasn't my major, but I loved every single course that I took. So there's a plug for religious studies for you. And during that symposium, I have to say that many of the presentations were very uninspiring for me personally. But there was one. It was a woman who was she was a returning student. She was an adult in her mid 30s, and had a little more life experience than most of the undergraduates that were presenting. But she was presenting on Yunus Emre. I'd never heard of Yunus Emre. And he is one of the most beloved Turkish Sufi poets. I mean, really, his poetry is kind of almost the personification of Turkish Sufism, along with Rumi, of course, and Gaibi and others, but a real folk hero also. And I was listening to the poetry as she was reading some of it, and it was beautiful. It really struck me. But what struck me even more is how it struck her as she was reading it. I mean, she was transfigured. There was such a glow coming off of her that I just remember thinking, that's what I'm looking for. That's the feeling that seems like should be there, if I throw that dirty word in. But it just seemed like that was more real. There was something about her doing what she was doing. It was emanating. It was evoking. There was something that was being called forth as she read this poetry that was greater than the poetry and greater than her reading the poetry. And you could just feel it. It was almost tangible. So that was one of the gems that was there. it took me many years myself, because I sort of hunkered down into the more academic approach, and I started reading a lot of Sufi literature, from poetry to the, just the commentaries that have been written over the centuries. And I read a lot of them, but even though I really resonated with them, I didn't understand still at that point that it was more than just a historical phenomenon, because everyone I was reading was from somewhere between the 10th and 15th centuries. So I was somewhat believing that it was just a historical thing. And it wasn't until I had another moment of somewhat personal crisis where things had really shifted. And a lot of it was, again, ongoing effects of the injuries that I had sustained that I mentioned earlier. But I had left my role as a vice principal of a school, and we were in the midst of building our house, and we had taken on this project ourselves. And so it was this immense project that I really didn't have the skill for, but I was learning it in real time, and that was very scary. It was exhausting work. My wife was working all the time to fund the building, and I was doing so much of the building. And we had this moment where we were painting one of the rooms toward the end of the project, and I'd heard about this Sufi way, and I'd even gone so far as to investigate some of the other living Sufi groups that finally occurred to me. I'd had this aha moment maybe a year before that, where I'd been trying to teach myself classical guitar for 4 years, and I was just getting stuck. I wasn't really getting any better. And I had this moment where I thought, maybe I need a teacher. And I'm a very do-it-yourself kind of person by nature. I'm very stubborn. I'm very much finding out, kind of how things work on my own and then figuring it out. But I just had this moment where I thought, maybe I need a teacher. And maybe that teacher can actually show me the shortcuts and the pitfalls that I keep stumbling into, so that I don't have to keep doing it and I can actually make progress. So I did that with the guitar. And even just the first 2 lessons I had, I was playing like Spanish classical guitar pieces within 2 lessons. I couldn't do that before. And that stayed with me. And the same thing happened around the Sufism. I thought, I've been studying this for years now. At that point, it had been more than 10 years, just reading it and rereading it. And it finally occurred to me, well, what if there are actual living Sufis that I could go speak to? And then why didn't this occur to me 10 years ago? So this was happening, and I checked out a couple of different variations of Sufi organizations. And the one that really called to me was the one that I am now connected to, because of that open, welcoming kind of quality that it has. And so I was with my wife, we were painting. I'd seen that there was this thing called the open path that I could participate in as a training. And it was pretty involved. I mean, it involved traveling. It was not inexpensive to do it. It required 9 months of my life to commit to it. And I've been talking about it. She was starting to get a little irritated because we had so much going on. And she said, you need to tell me, do you just want to do this? Is it just something you want to do? It'd be nice to do it. Or is this something that you need to do? And I just remember I just broke down. I just started crying. Why? I don't know. I wasn't sad. I wasn't anything. I just started crying, and I said, I need to do this. I don't know why, but that led me to making that connection. The connection is one that was immediate, but it was also something that was flexible, because it has allowed me over the years. I've been now part of this for almost 20 years. And we have something of you call it our inner way of being as a community, which is you're welcome to come, you're welcome to stay, you're welcome to leave, and you're welcome to come back. And I did all of those things over the years. And gradually, I found myself in a more of a kind of drifting toward the core of what was happening there. And that in a nutshell is how I have found myself where I am. And now it's become very much a part of who I am. And so, yeah.
I think you already talked about this a little bit, and you could do this by talking about your teacher, Pir Elias, but what does it mean on the spiritual path to have a teacher? Like with the guitar, to have a teacher meant, accelerated growth. In the spiritual path, what does it mean?
It's similar. I think that I want to make a couple of contrasts, though, because I think a lot of people hear spiritual teacher and they automatically start to imagine this guru kind of image. Giving that is a traditional thing, and it has existed in Sufi cultures in different times also, of sort of the devotion to the teacher, that whole kind of bhakti yoga practice. There are expressions of that, but let's just maybe put it in more contemporary terms, which makes it a little bit more attainable, I think, these days, is that having a spiritual teacher it's essentially having a very deep friend who is committed to your growth almost as much as you are committed to your growth. I don't think anyone can be more committed than you are to your own growth. But it's somebody who has both experience in the field of what you're exploring. So they know, again, how to recognize the pitfalls, where there are good shortcuts and where shortcuts fail. They can help guide and direct your efforts, but they don't tell you how or what to do necessarily. And that's something that I think a lot of people misunderstand, is that having a real teacher is not having somebody who tells you what to do. If that's all that you're getting, that's not necessarily a teacher in that sense, because in the Sufi traditions, the teacher is first and foremost a friend. And we are friends to each other. We are fellow travelers. So if you take that view of a travel companion, and the teacher role is the one who has done the traveling more. They've been on this path. They can guide you through the desert and get you to safety. Because in that sense, you do need a guide. Imagine the task of having to cross the Sahara Desert alone. Almost nobody could do it if they hadn't been shown the way. Because the only ones who know the way are the ones who survived.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that aspect to it. But the other part of it is that a teacher, in the best case, is they might provide templates to work with that are starting points. I like to use, just out of my education background, an image that works really well for me is the scaffold. And also from building houses, a scaffold is something that you put up temporarily as you're raising the structure so that you can access different parts of it. But once you've built the structure, you don't need the scaffold. In fact, it's ugly. You remove it so that the house can have its full expression as a house. And it can be used functionally, to be lived in and to be used. That's what our lives are. They're not decorations. They're meant to be lived in fully. So a teacher offers that. They show how to reach. So a scaffold allows you, again, to reach higher than you could on your own. And it allows you to take steps that you couldn't do completely by yourself.
Two things. One, when you say they don't tell you what to do, I'm guessing you mean like they don't tell you how to make your personal decisions, how to handle your finances, how to handle your sexual life, or what to eat, what not to eat, but rather they provide you with practices, with templates. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would put it that way. In my personal experience, if there's somebody that's prescribing everything, that's a little more, that's different from what we do. And there are groups, there are traditions that are more prescriptive. But again, from my experience, that if it's purely prescriptive, all that you're learning how to do is how to be a shape that fits into that particular role in that particular community. It's not telling you much about yourself. So to really, really explore who you are, what you are, yes, they can provide feedback like, oh, that didn't go so well, did it? Maybe next time you might try a different way of moving. What might that look like? There's a lot of inquiry that goes on. There's a lot of reflection, not just this is how it is. This is the mold that you must fill, and this is the shape that you must take to be acceptable. It's not that. It actually comes back to something I'm often reminded of this, actually. It's one of the sayings of Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas. And it's the one where he says, bring forth what is in you, and it will save you.
Mm-hmm.
Do not bring forth what is in you, and it will destroy you. So the teacher is the one that is evoking that which is truly in you. You could say that's your calling. It's one who helps you to see that and to bring it into reality in the world. So I use the mirror image again.
Yeah.
So there's the holding up of the mirror, and if you take that as the model, there are so many teachers that are available to any of us at any given time. I mean, my wife, Masami, has been a huge teacher to me in that sense of holding the mirror up, not instructing me, but of challenging me to keep going deeper. Like, don't stop there. Don't stop there. Don't get comfortable there. There's more to this story. What is it? And it's not telling me what it is. It's challenging me to find that in myself. And so when you're looking from that way, I mean, the whole world is a teacher. You can find these teachers anywhere, but that's where we start getting into the how of it, and how do we become receptive to the teachings that are there for us? Because when it comes down to it, in the end, a teacher is something that has something for the learner to learn. So if you're learning something from someone or something, that is a teacher to you. And another way of thinking of it is a teacher who is one who has what the learner needs, or can show them, point them toward that which they need, to recognize it.
I'm reminded of how I read some of what Pierre Elias has written on that's available on the website, and he talks about paradoxes. And I guess one of the paradoxes would be a teacher has something that the student needs that the student already has but doesn't know.
Yeah. Well, Rumi said his line that fits this really nicely is, he says, "Don't look at me, take what is in my hands." So he's holding out his hands. He's offering this gift, this perspective, this jewel, and he's saying, don't idolize me as the way. So, and there are a lot of instances of that kind of wisdom that come through many traditions. The Christian tradition is full of it, and especially the Gnostic Gospels. But Sufis have been very consistent with this over many, many, many centuries. That the learning happens internally. No one can give you that.
Mm-hmm. And forgive me if I'm not saying this word correctly. I haven't heard this word being said, so I'm guessing Chillas.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us more about that, and maybe examples of some of the I believe it's tasks that you are given, or inquiries that that you're
Yeah.
told to pursue, questions you're told to ask. So can you tell us more about that and maybe give examples?
Yeah. Well, so let me just start with a general description. Chillas, you're correct. The word essentially means a task, and with the implication that it's a spiritual growth edge involved in that task in some way. But one thing to know, and this is true particularly in this school of Sufism that I'm connected to. Chillas are deeply personal, so we don't really speak
I
of them
see.
to others than the one who gave it to us. And the one who gave it to us would generally be the one that we've regarded as our teacher or our companion in that way. And so I'm not going to say much about the details of chillas that I've been given, but I can say a lot more about chillas,
Or
just more
maybe some
general.
generic
Yeah,
examples
yeah,
of
yeah.
what they might look like.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll do that. So let me just say a few words about them, and that essentially these tasks they're designed to stretch us. So if you take it from that standpoint, okay, so we as humans we have this wiring that makes us keep going back into our familiar habits, our familiar shapes. And so the chilla is a task which can be given or it can be asked for. And it has this really interesting quality to it where it's not a requirement. So you can be given a chilla and you can refuse the chilla. That's completely up to the person. You can also ask for a chilla and not be given a chilla, or ask for a chilla and be given one, and then have it be something that is completely different from what you thought you needed. And so this is again the role of the teacher as guide, is to be able to see that which is needed, and then in that sense give it to the student, give it to the learner. And so some ways that we might do this is, let's say that we've accepted this. So we accept the chilla, and now becomes a kind of a sacred contract. And in that context, you could do like anything else. You could succeed at it. You could fail at it. You just don't know. It's opening the door that's actually in some ways the most important part. What you find on the other side of that door is completely unknown. And so that's kind of the grace and the amazing quality of a chilla, is that it opens things that are unseen for you. And so just some examples of kinds of things. Okay, this gets back to what I just mentioned a minute ago about that bringing forth what is in you, that from the Gospel of Thomas. But it could be something like, I have an idea about how learning should happen. Like it must come only orally, directly from my spiritual teacher. Well, if somebody's really caught up in that, they might be given a chilla that says, well, you need to actually read some of the literature that's out there, because that's going to fill in a lot of the gaps. And if you close that off because you don't believe you can get the real thing unless you're talking to your teacher directly or at their feet or whatever, however you imagine that, that might be one way to do that, is to expand them by giving them readings to explore and to really, really go into it. It could be something else. It might be that I'm full of knowledge and my teacher knows this, and challenges me to give a talk about it or to share it with others in a public forum. And I might not want to do that because I like my quiet little contained world and my reflections on it. But that might be a chilla that's given to somebody. I mean, and I'm not, the way I'm talking about it might sound like I'm setting it up as breaking down resistances, which often it is. That can have the flavor of it. It's like somebody who's very uptight in an ethical, moral way might be given a chilla to not necessarily to do something that goes against their ethics and morals, but to put themselves in a situation where the things that are against their ethics and morals are actively happening, and to find a way of being at ease with that. So much of what the Chillas are doing is, again, I used the word stretching earlier. They're meant to stretch us and to challenge us, again, to see more of what we are and to see that there is more to us and to all of what's around us than what we have been conditioned to think it is through habits and learning and culture and family and history and, politics and everything else. What else is here other than what I automatically see and judge it to be? So that's kind of the function of Chillas. But I mean, they go on. I mean, some people might have a Chilla to do a particular type of retreat, or a challenge to do like a vision quest, or to fast. But in saying these, if anybody's taking notes on my examples, okay, cross them out right now, because those are given to individuals for particular reasons. They're not universally applicable to everyone at all times. And that's something that we need to understand about practices like the Chilla, is that they are prescriptive for a time and place and a person.
Where do you see and experience God these days?
Just keeping it light here. Okay. Seeing and experiencing God. So let me just.
You could use any verb, really. See,
Yeah,
experience,
no.
know. Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, the obvious answer is everywhere. Everywhere. So if you take a mystical view, that's the only answer. But we can break that down. I mean, it's for me personally, the easiest place to have that experience of immersion into, we have a lot of nice words for it, like oneness, or that's probably one of the most common these days anyway. But just inclusion into the divine being, and in the Sufi parlance, we might call it the only being. There's only one being. This is all beingness of that one being. And so for me, nature is one of the best places personally. That's where I find that when the I that's speaking very quickly dissolves without trying. I just went on a hike 2 days ago where I wasn't even aware of anything except really just the gestalt, the totality of the experience of my body moving and breathing and being in this forest and going up this mountain, until I was coming back down. And then I started thinking about something, and very quickly it collapsed into this head reality of this little thing that was bothering me. And I felt it so viscerally. And it was so obviously that's the forgetting. That's the falling away from that unity consciousness. And upon feeling that, I was able to very quickly then do something that I know to do that brings me back to it. And immediately I was out of my head. The I that was speaking and worrying and being annoyed about this thing I was thinking about was gone.
What is it that you did?
I did something, and again, I don't want to put this out there as hey, this will work for you too kind of thing. I mean that's the challenge, right? When we're doing interviews like this, one of the things that's always enticing is, what's a practice that works for you, But what I did, it wouldn't necessarily work for everybody, because it works for me because I have practiced it, and because I have a deeper connection with the practice of it. So, but I'll tell you what it is, because there's no harm in doing that. One of the central Sufi practices is Zikr. And there are many, many styles of Zikr. We have one that's musical, where we actually, it's almost like a musical prayer, where we're vocalizing it together. But Zikr can be silent. It can also be spoken. I mean, there are many ways. So this particular one is a Zikr that uses the most traditional formula, which is the beginning of the Shahada, which is the expression of faith in the Islamic tradition. But it's the meaning of those words that gives us this particular power. And those words, it's just 7 syllables, and it's La ilaha illallah. Okay, La ilaha illallah. And sure, they roll off the tongue beautifully. And the practice is to repeat this. The Zikr practice is to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until it penetrates you. But the thing about these words and why it's so meaningful for me personally is that those words have very specific meaning, which is both poetic and lyrical and also very existential all at the same time. And it means so la is the negative. So it's la ilaha is the first part. So, and that's often translated as there is no God, but it's negating any other being than this. Okay, there's no separateness, there's no otherness, there's only this. Okay, that's the first part. So la ilaha illallah, except this is how you might say that, except for God, except for the one. There is nothing but the one. There is nothing but this, is the more contemporary way that we might interpret that. There is nothing but this, with a capital T on this. There is nothing but this. And so for me as a practice, it works because I have done this in such a way that I will do that Zikr practice at moments where I'm struggling with something, and at moments where there's something difficult happening, and at moments where there's something really joyful happening, and something that I really wanted to happening. So I use it in all kinds of circumstances. And by doing that, it works very quickly now for me to come back to that reality. There is nothing but this. I get to go away at that point.
Zikr, if I'm not mistaken, it literally means remembrance. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
yes.
it seems like earlier when you were hiking, you were to a certain degree in that lived experience of remembrance, and having forgotten, now this verbal remembrance is your bridge back to
way
that.
Of saying it. Yeah, it's a good way of saying it. It's kind of funny because we use the word remembrance. What are we remembering? We're remembering that unity, that only being, of which I am an expression. You're an expression. All of this is an expression of that only being. So it's a remembrance. So it's this forgetting, remembering dynamic. It's kind of an oscillator a little bit, because you can see it. The remembering is forgetting also, and the forgetting is remembering, because as you're remembering one thing, you're forgetting the other. And so to make it not just be a dualistic kind of frame, it's remembering, forgetting. It comes together and it moves. And that's how so much of our existence as humans is we are in these kind of dualistic concepts that can't be separated apart, but we treat them as separate options, when in fact they always come together. They always arrive together. And so, yeah, the practice of remembering doesn't take us away, because even there's this prayer, Ibn Arabi's prayer, that's very famous, as he says, "Take me away from myself and be my being." And then there's a second part that he says, "Then shall you see everything through my eyes." But the thing that's not clear is who's talking at each point. I mean, for me, the more that I've repeated that one, it sounds to me like you're having a bit of a dialogue with the divine presence, who is looking back through your own eyes, but you're asking to be taken away, take me away from myself and be my being. That's the remembering, but also the forgetting of myself as an individual separate entity, because that doesn't exist. But then it's almost as if the response is, yes, then shall you see everything through my eyes. And that prayer actually really gets at what is at the heart of Sufism, which is this. It's this. The term fana is used as the annihilation of the sort of ego self, the identified self, the commanding self, it's sometimes called. that's where we're getting. Take me away from that and be my being. And then we get to the other part of it, which is the other aspect, which is after you've had that experience of fana, this annihilating experience, you don't go away. It's not like you're turned into dust. You're not just a little pile of ashes, although it might feel like you're headed that way at times. But you have to re-enter the world at that point. And that's where this other lovely partner to fana, which is baka, comes in. And baka is sometimes translated as subsistence or subsiding within the divine reality back in the context of the world. So I'm back in the frame of being a person with a life and responsibilities and crises in the world and all of that. And so survival is another way that's defined. You're surviving the experience of being annihilated and then returning. And then again, that's another oscillating kind of pair where they really come together. You can't separate them one then another because they keep happening together. And so that's part of that waking up, waking down kind of experience that happens, the enlightenment, the endarkenment that we talked about. You're constantly moving through this oscillation as you become more of what you are.
In an earlier episode, this was the first episode that was that I published for the podcast. I was talking to Daigaku Rumi, who is a Zen teacher, and we were discussing a teaching from Dogen, who is a Japanese Zen master, and he says the exact same thing in different words. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be verified by myriad things.
Yep.
So it's interesting to me how all of these seem to be pointing to what should be universal human essence, a universal reality. So in nature, you see God, you experience God. Are there other places?
Sure. I mean, just in other people, especially in the best of times. I mean, this is the real. This is where the rubber meets the road. I mean,
I'm laughing because for myself, but also for many people, I hear people say it's so much easier with trees and flowers and cats and dogs, but people, come on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people are hard for us because we exist in this little narrow band of experience that we might call the human domain. And we look at virtually everything through and from that view. And so it's so easy for all of our own projecting and, our psychological patterns and emotional tendencies to get tripped when we're dealing with other people. But I do see the divine in other people, and you can particularly see it in communal forms, communal gatherings where there is a real vital connection between the people. And it doesn't even have to be explicitly a spiritual gathering. I mean, you can find it among people who are really, like, if you ever go to an artisan's workshop somewhere that people are really in flow with what they're doing, it could be that. It could be in a library. I mean, there's so many places where you can find it. I mean, certainly big spaces that have been designed to uplift us, like cathedrals, are basically an indoor version of a forest. That's what they were mimicking is the trees pointing us up to the heavens. But yeah, among people, I mean, watch little kids and you'll see that they are made for this world. They're made to explore and question and try things out. And that's all an expression of this divine, this one being finding out what it is, becoming more of what it is. So, I mean, it's ultimately everywhere we look. And that's what I started with, is just saying, well, it's everywhere, even in myself.
Yes. And to see it in nature, in other people, is to see it in yourself. It is an inner experience. But would you talk more distinctly about perhaps some inner experiences you've had?
In Any particular direction or?
Of what you might call, I think you've already shared some of those kinds of experiences, what you might call divine experience or experience of God.
Well, I mean, yeah, one of them I mentioned was that river experience.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was a very deep one. I've had the experience when I've been with people as they're dying at the moment that they are physically dying. Just moments of, I would say there are moments of aloneness that have been profoundly filled with that sense, while also still feeling alone. Ironically, um, big vistas, experiences of beauty of all kinds, large and small. I mean, beauty is such a subjective, ephemeral thing that, I mean, we all know this phrase of "it's in the eye of the beholder," but it's more complicated than that in a sense. It's simple, but it relies on the receiver of the beauty to really recognize it. And there's something, and I'm using beauty here as almost a stand-in for God, or it's something, in our tradition, love, harmony, and beauty are words that we often point to and use as pointers, because they have this quality of, harmony has that sort of the balancing aspect when things are in balance to each other in a dynamic kind of way, a living kind of way, not in a stultified, frozen way of like a non-moving balance, perfect balance. No, this is a dynamic movement. That sort of harmony is where we can find divine presence, if we want to call it that. Love, okay, love experiences are the definition of that. And love is something that we can't experience unless we ourselves are open to it. We can't receive it, we can't give it if we're not open. And so there's also a quality of hurt that comes with this experience of God, that we have to be open to the pain of the separation as much as the rapture, if you want to use that word, of the immersive experience, or the complete discombobulation of that, because it can also be that. So I'm just speaking generally here, but I mean, I could look out my window right now and see a little bird and see that presence there, or watch the breeze moving a limb. All of those to me are an entry into that. It's that present. I mean, as classical Sufis have said, God is closer to you than your jugular vein. So you can't fall out of this. You can't be separate from it, but you can believe that you're separate from it. And you can arrange your life in such a way that you feel separate from it. But you can't actually be separate from it.
You talked about this already a little bit, the hurt that arises when one presumes one is separate, which is often expressed in Sufi poetry and Sufi teachings as this longing. And that was my entryway into Sufism. Just the description of that longing, the pining for the beloved, and which would seem like just exactly how I felt. I would, yeah. And could you talk more about that, how that is understood in your tradition? And I was going to ask if what is the remedy?
Well, it's not a bad question. I mean, it's a fair question. I mean, actually, it's that question that starts us. That's what got the Buddha off to his adventures, right? He started off with basically that question: what's the remedy to suffering? Which longing feels like? I mean, but let's separate those two ideas for a second, because I don't want to say longing is suffering, or that suffering is longing. It's it can be suffering if you make it suffering, but let's stick to the original question. Longing absolutely is a it's a central kind of metaphor in Sufi traditions. And so and it's such a powerful one because it's something that is universal. I mean, I don't know of any human being, that at least I've never met one, that has not had some sort of feeling of longing or yearning. And it might be that the object of their yearning is a person or an experience of some kind. Or if we start to elevate that and we open it up, we start seeing that the longing is for that which we can't grasp or comprehend. We can't draw it into ourselves. We can't wrap our mind or our arms around it and hold it. But somehow we have an intuitive sense of its existence through our own. And so, I just touched on this in the recent Walking with Wisdom session that we had, where the theme was coming home. And that is a very central part of how Sufis tend to look, is to talk in terms of coming home. And longing is very connected to that idea of coming home. And now what is home? I mean, it's returning to that which you truly are, which is another way of saying coming back into the embrace of the only being. I mean, we could poeticize this and turn it into all sorts of lovely phrases, but that's an important aspect, is to recognize that, like Ram Dass said, we're all just walking each other home. And so from a communal aspect, we're able to acknowledge and recognize with each other that that's what we're doing. We all have our individual sense of what this longing is, this thing that causes us to reach beyond our ordinary day-to-day lives, or to look at them in a completely different way, to see through them, might be another way of thinking about that. I think that's maybe more helpful for me. And it comes back to this word of loneliness, or just feeling lonely, because we can have that sensation even in the midst of people who care about us and who we feel closeness with. I mean, I think anybody who has had any wake up to their own spiritual life and their own path has had that sense at some point of just noticing, I'm very lonely, even though I'm with people who I care about and who are having a good time, and I'm having a good time, but I still feel that there's something that I feel, this pull. I feel separated from something. I feel there's something I need to be closer to that I can't quite touch, and I can't quite put it into words. I can't articulate what that thing is, and not knowing what it is and not being able to have it makes it even stronger. And yeah.
A few things that you've said. I don't think I've ever shared this with anyone, but what you shared just brought it up. The Buddha's Four Noble Truths. I've always thought of his diagnosis of suffering, and then the cause of suffering, the ideology, he says, is craving, tanha. It's the craving that makes us suffer. And I've always thought he's talking about that longing. And suffering ensues when that longing, which is truly for our own true nature, for that one being, is then projected onto other things, and we develop attachment and aversion to other things.
Yeah.
Whereas that longing itself, correctly recognized, would be the doorway to going back home to our own true self. And interestingly, when I used to feel this very, very strong longing for years, and I had a very distinct sense that nothing in this world, no one in this world, no kind of achievement, no other person, no kind of relationship could satisfy this longing. I was very certain that it was longing for God. And interestingly, I don't feel as strongly now. And interestingly, also, that I find it, as you said, in people, in relationships, in things of this world, that presence that I was longing for. So there's an interesting movement there, that initially the recognition that, I think it's Hazrat Inayat Khan, he has an essay on the ultimate objective of life. We read that in my Meaning of Death class. And he says, you pursue that in success, or you pursue that in pleasure, or certain kinds of achievements, but ultimately you're always pursuing that ultimate objective.
That's well said. And yes, I do think that we're trapped in language in many respects. And some of the clues for it are just even, the use of prepositions. That actually changes the nuance of the meaning completely. This is something I've come to realize, that there are a number of concepts we have that operate this way. Longing's one of them. As you were saying this, of longing for, as soon as we add the for, we have an object that's required to fulfill it. But what about just longing, as a presence, as an aspect of our being? And it works with other things too. You can try this out, but another one that's very powerful with this is gratitude. And it was something that I sort of stumbled into myself, and I realized how much I did this, is that we're taught to be grateful for something or someone. But when you separate the object away and you don't just say gratitude for, but just gratitude, and you sit with that and you feel into the energy of gratitude as a natural, innate part of what you are, it's a very different experience. And as you said, when you make that movement, which I believe is what you have described here, you've made the movement out of objectifying, which is what language does. Language is always trying to hold and contain. Unfortunately, sorry, everyone, but the whole of the cosmos cannot be contained in our minds or in our language. So we have to yield to the shortcomings of that and allow for some poetic play, but we also have to not take them too seriously. And that's one way we can do this, is just play with some of these expressions. Just sit with the word, just feel the longing and feel it radiating. It radiates out, it radiates back. And you can, everything has this longing quality. I mean, the trees, it's not just people. You go into a forest, you will feel the trees. And it's not your imagination. This is what living beings do. They're longing, maybe toward is a word we could use, but then that creates a similar kind of thing. It's part of our beingness, seeing itself. And then bridging, as you said, bridging between the personal experience of it and then the containing experience of it that our personal experience is held within. Ooh, it quickly slips past our ability to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Could you talk more about, you can use any of these words, I'll say 3 words, about the heart, or love, or devotion?
Anything in particular?
Well, okay, let me make it more practical. If a student comes to you, a young college student, and they say, I don't know about this religion business, I don't know about this God business, but I do want to become more loving. I want to become a more loving person. How can I do that? What would you say to them?
Well, that's, I would want to know what they mean, first of all. I mean, I would probably hit them right back with a question of what does that mean to you? What does loving mean to you? Is this something that you feel you lack in some way, or are you missing it? I would encourage them to look at their own ideas which almost certainly are going to be limiting their experience.
Oh, I
Just
I can
yeah.
venture an answer. Role playing a student. Let's say, well, I find that in my relationships sometimes I want to be more loving, kinder, more generous, but I feel like my heart shuts down, or I feel like I end up being resentful, or end up feeling envious of others. I want to be happy for them, but I don't feel that all the time. So what do I do when my heart shuts down that way? Or I bump up against my own limitations in my capacity to love.
Well, how would you do that? How would you go about opening your heart back up if you feel it closing and you're feeling closed off by those experiences? What opens it back up?
That's my question. As the
But this is
student,
a
I might
yeah,
say,
yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
that
Go
student, I
ahead.
might say, well, it takes me a few days. Sometimes I end up acting out. I end up acting resentful, saying resentful things, or I end up being mean to others, or getting shut down and isolating. And it takes me a few days to feel like myself again. Um, but I want to be able to reduce that time, and I want to be able to not give in to all of these things that don't feel loving, don't feel open.
Yeah, and I would say let's break down what loving means for you, because without a working sense of that, we might just be assuming that there's a common experience that we all are pointing to when we use the word. And I don't think that's the case. So we need to break it down a little bit and just say, what is loving? What is loving? And how do I know I'm not loving or experiencing loving? So I would encourage somebody to do that first of all. And the best laboratory for that is yourself. Because so many of the things that we're looking for in others, we are not finding in ourselves because we're not looking there. We're not able to. It's kind of like this idea of you can't recognize something unless you've had the experience of it previously. That is recognition. So if you've never had the experience, you've never seen something, you wouldn't know what it was to begin with. You might not even see it. So that's one thing, is to let's name some experiences of loving that you would know. And when you can say, that's loving, and when I'm loving, this is how I am. And we might find that when I'm loving, I am open. We might use words like vulnerable. That word's a little bit overused these days, but it has to do with, I'll use words from Chogyam Trungpa. Was actually one of his ways of describing this was you have to turn yourself inside out to the world. You have to make yourself sensitive and sensitized to everyone else and everything else that's happening. And that can give you a real basis for loving. So loving has a lot to do with compassion for oneself, but also for others. It has to do with being receptive to difference and to circumstances that aren't the way that you wish them to be. So again, it's recognizing this is what is here now. La ilaha illallah. There's nothing but this. That's a kind of loving. One of the teachers in this lineage, my teacher's teacher, Fazal Inayat Khan, one of his well-remembered sayings is, "You can always love more." And that is an invitation to keep opening up. And in this example where the student might be struggling with personal feelings or not being myself, or that sort of thing. Well, you want to be loving is to actually feel yourself, is to be as yourself. And it's to welcome and receive others as they are. I mean, Jesus did a whole lot of good teaching on this also. I mean, he was sort of the expert in the literature, in a sense. So if you want to, expand on that, he had a lot of good things to say about it. But it is dissolving the you and the me. It's dissolving the subject-object distinction, and seeing not only yourself in the other, which is really what the compassion movement is recognizing yourself in the other, but then ultimately you're also recognizing the divine presence in the other, and that completes the circuit, if you want to say it that way, because the loving is happening. It's coming toward me, it's coming from me, it's coming through me, and that's why you can always love more, because there's no limit.
Because God is infinite.
Yeah, there's no limit to. I mean, we have all of this agreement that God is love. I mean, most traditions have something that says that. And if we really look into what we mean by love, there's a lot to do with receptivity. There's a lot to do with moving beyond our own identification so that we can actually feel directly the experience of others. And that includes pain and hurt. So going back to that theme, it's not just warm dopamine, good feeling in our body. That's what a lot of us have been conditioned to think of it as. I mean, the fact that I remember my wife Masami saying when she first came to the US from Japan, she was only 15. She was learning English, and she was really confused that people in her high school would say both "I love you" and "I love cheeseburgers." And so she just thought, why is the same word used for both of those situations? Because they don't mean the same thing.
No.
and so again, we're back to language, where we have to remember that it's not about the words. It's about the beingness. It's about the quality of what is evoked through us. I'm thinking, I didn't say this before, but Ibn Arabi, it's his description of beauty. He says that beauty is the welcoming openness of the truth toward us. The welcoming openness of the truth toward us. And again, truth, beauty, harmony, love are somewhat talking about the same thing.
Does Ibn Arabi mean that? So, okay. What that reminds me of, I have a person in mind who deeply, I'd say deeply spiritual, right? As a pathway of inner discovery, and they arrived at a place where they came to the limitation of their own understanding of God as love. They just, it just didn't make sense to them. It was not their experience. They were not experiencing love, God as love, not as being loved, nor as being capable of loving others. So they stumped. They were at the edge of their own understanding of what that means. However, they were still able to, instead of giving up on God altogether, they were still able to tune into God as beauty. Beauty was still accessible. Beauty was still visible in their daily life. So is that something similar to what Ibn Arabi is saying, that beauty is that welcoming gesture or that openness to truth?
Well, I do think he's saying that, and I do think that in this example, again, there's a conceptual obstacle involved here about what is God in the first place, or what should God be in my mind. My ideal of God is this, and the world has greatly disappointed my idealism when it comes to this ideal. So Can we find other ways in? Absolutely. I think that's what I'm hearing in what you're describing here, is somebody that, in a sense, lost faith with one aspect of their ideal. And that's a really shattering
Oh,
experience.
yes. Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, because we can't separate ourselves from that. I mean, the ideal came from us, and it is an expression of our own being, in a sense, that we can't just quit and say, okay, that's it, the end. There's no God. You might say, well, that was a failed idea of God.
Exactly. So what people are often disillusioned with is their own idea of God.
Yeah.
And it's really painful if one does not see that that's par for the course. That's what the process looks like. You abandon God to find God. I think something similar Meister Eckhart says, you have to take leave of God to find God.
Yeah. I think it wasn't it. Is that the line where, God is present when I am not?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was Meister Eckhart. It might have been him, but yeah. I mean, it's just this opens up a huge territory of exploration here, because even in the Sufi traditions, they've used the so-called 99 beautiful names, which again it's a metaphor. It's not that there are exactly 99 names of God. It's that there are these qualities that are human qualities, that are our qualities, that we value, and that shape our world, which we attribute to this beingness beyond what we can comprehend, as holding all of those in the most complete way possible that we can imagine. And that's what makes them the beautiful names. But they are human qualities. I mean, that's what we have to remember. We are there. I forget the name of the physicist, but I used a quote by him in a retreat last year, and it was this notion that humans are experts at recognizing intermediate sized objects moving through intermediate sized space and time. And basically anything outside of that is invisible to us. So we're contained in this very narrow spectrum of physiological and conceptual experience. Language completely limits our ability to express. I mean, how many different ways, if anyone who's multilingual or bilingual, that the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 languages that you speak are all very different in how they're able to express certain things. Some are better than others at certain parts of our experience. And it's kind of like that. I mean, we have to, this is where relaxing, letting go, it comes back to this. It becomes very practical, because this is where we see it happening, that we're getting too uptight, we're gripping too hard. Is even the very words that we use, if we insist that it is like this, that's where we get caught. I mean, that's something. Wow. I mean, we could really go far into this topic, but let's keep going.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate one thing you said. The limitations of our languaging, or capacity to language things, the limitations of our logic, the limitations of mind, are not limitations of reality. There are limitations as humans, and often we mistake that what we can't logically figure out must not be so. Let's see. I have a number of questions. I think you already talked about this, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and maybe connect it directly to the Guest House poem. How do you relate with thoughts and feelings in general?
Thoughts and feelings. Okay, well, I think the simplest way to answer this is like a human. I relate to them as a human. So I have my thoughts, I have my feelings. They are part and parcel to who I am and the experiences that I have. So from that standpoint, I mean, I know where you're going with this, or at least I think I know where you're going with this. But the idea, because we have so many practices and so many teachings about moving beyond thoughts and feelings, overcoming thoughts and feelings, mastering thoughts and feelings. I mean, there are some of them are very aggressive in their approach. But most traditions agree that thoughts and feelings are like the clouds passing across the blue sky. They come, they go, they change shape, they disappear. And so in their essence, they're nothing. They're insubstantial. And yet they're also directly part of our experience. So we have to have a relationship with them in some way. And hopefully the relationship we have with them is one that will be productive and beneficial to us and to others and not destructive. So in that sense, thoughts and feelings have their place, but I don't believe in them too much. I don't give them too much credence, because it's very easy to run away, as I did the other day. I mentioned when I was hiking, I had this stray thought that I followed, and it immediately stirred up these feelings. And I had these emotions of irritation and just annoyance immediately. And the moment that I did that, it shut me down from being receptive to the totality of the experience that was unfolding in and around me. So we have to see them. They can become like that. They can become like, instead of walking through a wild forest, you're now in an urban setting with stop signs and traffic signals and sidewalks and rules of driving and pedestrians and cyclists. It's organized chaos in a way, but it's a totally arbitrary organized chaos. That's what our thoughts and feelings feel like to me a lot of the time. They don't have to mean anything, but the fact is they do occur, and they are part of our experience. So again, we the best that we can do is be understanding of their nature. They're fleeting, but they're powerful. We can have a relationship with them that understands that and doesn't grip onto them, so that they don't take us for a ride, because that's what will happen. If we follow them, they will direct us to other places, and then we'll suddenly find ourselves somewhere else. And if we're not really paying attention and we're not aware of what's happening, we may find that we very thoughtlessly, so to speak, mindlessly, heedlessly behaved in ways that actually were creating problems for us or others. So I do, they have their place. They need to be held in a certain kind of, a light hold that allows us to acknowledge them without getting lost in them. And then we can be friendly with them. We can even have compassion toward our own thoughts. If a lot of teachers and even Sufi teachers have used the analogy of the sort of inner community. And so if you imagine this kind of round table within us that has all of our aspects of personality that each have their own voice and opinion and level of volume that they shout or whisper at, it's kind of like that. And so if you can take that approach, it eases the pressure quite a bit, that you don't have to believe your thoughts. Your feelings are your feelings. They're your natural reactions to what's happening. You don't have to do anything with them. They will pass. Every single feeling will pass. Every single thought will pass. But just, allow them to come and allow them to go. I think that's what we've been taught for centuries. It still works.
I told you that I asked my students in my classes that I teach, and the question I gave them was, what would you ask a spiritual teacher? I said a true and an advanced spiritual teacher. Because their response would be, is it a true teacher? Are they just presenting themselves as a teacher? So I assured them, what would you ask a true spiritual teacher? And one section in particular, last semester, we had many music therapy students. I think almost half of the class was music therapy students. And this question is relevant to you. Their question was, what is the role of music in spirituality? And I'll also say, in the same regard, that right before joining for our conversation, I was listening to Walking with Wisdom, the most recent one, I believe, and um, you were singing with I think, a harmonium. You were
Yeah.
singing and sama. So could you talk more about that?
Sure. Okay. So let me unpack that a little bit. So music. Let's just talk about music and the spiritual connection, because this is going to vary a lot by traditions. Even within the spectrum of Sufism, you have proponents of it and you have people that are absolutely against using it. And that's been true for many, many centuries. So what is music and what is its role in conducting us or evoking what is within us and connecting it with what is beyond us, which we're already connected to, but we forget. Okay, so Inayat Khan, who was he brought the lineage of what we now call the Inayati, or the Western Universal Sufism, from India to the West a little over 100 years ago, and he was the quintessential Indian classical musician. He was very, very highly regarded in India. He played for royalty and various places in that period. Very, very accomplished as a musician himself. And interestingly enough, one of his most profound comments that he made was that when he was tasked with bringing Sufism to the West by his teacher, he realized some point later, because he used music as a way of bringing people in, he would do performances with his cousin and brothers, and that's how they would bring people together. And eventually then he would start giving little talks with the concert. But what he ended up doing eventually is giving that up. And he said that was when he realized the depth of the spirit, is that he had to sacrifice his music in order to be able to serve as a teacher. And so, coming from someone like that, who didn't abandon it, I just want to say he stopped being a musician, though, in the same sense that he had been. And he only used music in a very careful way, and only for certain people who he felt were ready to receive it. So music has this quality. It's very powerful. Music speaks through us, not to us. And it doesn't require words. We feel it instantly, and it affects us emotionally. And that's what gives it both its power and its danger when we're talking about it in a spiritual context, because we can't universally say all music is spiritual. Okay? Because it depends on what happens in us when we're exposed to it. And there are certain kinds of music that can put us into a heightened emotional state that is just an emotional state. And it can also make us very open to suggestion, for example. We can become very malleable through the use of music in the hands of somebody who is doing it even perhaps unknowingly. So we have to be aware of what's happening when music is a part of what's going on. And so the what you just referenced is I shared a sama, or a zikr, a musical prayer. So the sama is the practice of what we call audition, where, and that this goes back very far back. I mean, Rumi wrote about it quite a bit in his works, where in his time they would have musicians that would play, and you might have somebody sing or recite poetry or read something from the Quran or something like that, and that would be their practice, and the music is heightening the experience of it. But it's always done with caution. And so this practice that I did, where I introduced the Zikr, which doesn't have words, it's just vocalizing. But it's, for me, in doing that, it is the It is not even the melody. It's never the words, but it's the feeling that is being evoked that helps me to know if the music is having the function of actually operating on a spiritual level or not. Because if it's making me think, just simply think about something, or just have an intense emotional reaction, neither of those is getting me really toward anything. And so when I know that music is having, I would say, a transportive sort of role, is when I'm out of myself. And I'm not spaced out. I'm not blissed out necessarily. I'm not unaware. I'm fully present. Even to, again, what we were just talking about, the movement of thoughts and feelings. I'm aware of them, but I'm able, the music is almost like a connector, and it helps me. My experience of it is almost like there's a plug getting connected beyond me and within me. And that when that happens, I am able to be as something much more whole than me trying to be me on my own. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I would come back to it, is that the music has to be used carefully and preferably by somebody who has the understanding of how and why to use it, and that it's not simply about evoking emotional response.
Right. And as you were sharing that, and this was the feeling that I had when listening to your music earlier, in the Zen tradition, they talk about hollowing words. And it's the same idea that words can evoke emotions, evoke certain thoughts. Words can program you very easily, right? Especially when you consider the person speaking the words as someone of authority, whatever you project onto them. But in the Zen tradition, they've really honed in on using words to hollow out rather than deposit something. And to me, that was the experience. It felt like it was a hollowing out, like your music was making room through the thoughts and feelings into something greater. It was yeah. Yesterday, one of the interviews I just published, he talked about poetry in that way. The words become transparent, something greater shines through. And that's my experience was I'm being hollowed out.
Yeah. It's like there's that. I think others have said this, but I think what I'm remembering is from Heidegger, where he talks about us being like a clearing in the forest.
Mm-hmm.
It's that capacity. It's the space that is made in order for us to become aware of what else is present. And so, yeah, that's a great description of it that you just gave. It is something, and there is also a quality to it in the practice of the Zikr that we do musically, of when the voice becomes activated, it opens up, it has a heart opening quality. And and this is where, we could get into the metaphysics of the chakras and all these energy centers of the body, and Sufis have their own kind of versions of that too, that we're touching into something energetic that it is beyond. And I think that's the key. It's beyond our limitations that we normally impose on ourselves, knowingly or unknowingly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have one more question from a student, and then we'll soon be closing up. So the question from the student, and this was included in the questions I sent you, was, if you could change one thing about this world, what would you change and why? And I'm going to add to that a little bit. I think part of the place the question is coming from is the suffering in the world, or what they perceive as crisis in the world, and how can they respond to that. And I'm going to connect that to your discussion I think it was with Lynn in the Walking with Wisdom about activism and how you recontextualize that. So could you talk directly to the question and maybe lead up to activism and what that means to you?
I don't remember exactly what I said at that moment, but yeah, as far as the changing the world, there have been so many profound teachers that have reminded us that you can't change the world. And as much as we might want to reshape the world, and all of these ideas about social justice and peace and having a society of laws and agreements and social contract, we have to remember that those are all ideas about how a society can function together. And as one person in a much larger system, it really, really isn't, for most of us, I should say. There are individuals that find themselves in places where they can make a small movement and make a big change from it. So, and if you're ever one of those people, you have a lot of responsibility when that time comes. And you listening may be one of those people one day. In our ordinary lives, though, what we have to attend to is what's happening right now. We have to take care of the moment that's before us right now. And that might not be intellectually or emotionally satisfying to us, because I know the feeling. I want big change. I want society to be just. I want people not to be unfairly hurting and killing each other or discriminating against each other for one reason or another. Those are all perfectly good things to have as ideals that you are living toward. You're living into it through your own actions day to day. But I mean, that it seems almost a cop-out answer of sorts to say it, but the thing I would change, that I could say I would change, is myself, because that is actually the only thing I can change. And in so doing, and this is where we get much more into the spirituality and the metaphysics of it, is what changes when we change ourselves. Because when we change how we are, and there's actually a lot of social science research on this now too, about change. When we change, our context changes, what we see changes, how we perceive things changes, how we speak to people changes. That ripples on and on and on with everything and everyone that we have contact with, and even some that we don't have contact with directly. The ripples will touch them. So that whole idea of the 7 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, as it used to be.
I'm not familiar
Don't
with it.
know
No.
that one?
No.
I won't go into that. It was an old game that people used to do. It was the idea was that you could find within 7 connections of people, you could find your way to Kevin Bacon, the actor. That
Oh, yeah.
and you could really make that anybody, because if you
I
go
see.
into human genetics,
Yeah.
our last living common ancestor only lived about 2,500 years ago or so, 3,000 years ago, something like that. That's what the computational genomics have to say. And so we're all connected, is the point. We're all connected much more than we think and much more than we see in our day-to-day lives.
Right. And I see what you're saying too. One person changing, if we can trace it back to one common ancestor, that's me changing in the future.
Yeah,
Millions and billions of people if we go 1,000 years, 2,000,
that's right.
3,000 years ago later.
That's
Yeah.
right. You change your life. You do healing in your own lineage of the human tree. You're doing big work in the world. I mean, the more we understand about time as a construct and time as a function in quantum physics, we're finding that it doesn't, well, first of all, it's not linear. I mean, it operates forward and backward as far as we can tell. And so it's not a small, insignificant thing to work on yourself. Because if you actually buy into this, if you actually accept the idea that you are a component of, or connected to, or an expression of the one being that exists, is how we might talk about it in the tradition that I'm from. If any part of that feels true to you, speaks to you, then you understand it's not an insignificant task to take care of your immediate being. Your body is a place that you can start to be healthy and nourished and strong as much as you can be in your own life, so that when things change and move, you have capacity, you have energy to do what is needed, you have clarity to respond. These aren't small things. They don't happen either on a large scale if you don't have a lot of individuals working on themselves. You don't get the big change. Big changes come from small changes. So that probably isn't going to satisfy many people, that response, but it's a true response. It's an honest response. And I don't know. Keep your ideals. I'm not saying don't have ideals. You need them. Otherwise, you'll be looking at the ground all day long. So you need something that draws you up and that helps you move forward. But also know that it's just an idea, and that idea can also change as you can change yourself. As you change yourself, your ideals will also grow with you. So that's where I would say it right now. I may change that at some point, but that's what I've got.
2 questions. There, you can answer either or both. The first question is, if you were to write an autobiography, what would you title it?
That was unexpected. That might be the title. That was unexpected.
Okay, then I don't need to mention the next question.
well, so I mean, but if I was going a little bit more, that one word that I have played with a lot that comes up for me that ties together a lot of what we talked about is the word unforced. But also I like that was unexpected. I think that
did that come to you unexpectedly right now?
That would be a good title. That was unexpected.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Ihsan. I really appreciate our time together and your experience, strength, wisdom that you've shared. I'm very grateful. Do you have any parting words for our listeners?
Just encouragement. Just encouragement. Don't stop. Don't stop being curious. Don't stop opening up to adversity and challenge. I know the world it's a scary place. I don't know that it ever has not been scary. I mean, I think about some of the people we've been talking about, like Rumi, who was, he ended up in Turkey because his family was fleeing from the Mongols that were spreading out and taking over everywhere and killing people and destroying whole civilizations. So, I mean, we're in our own time of crisis and difficulty, but know that what is in you is powerful. It is beautiful. It is something that you and only you have to offer the world. But the only way we'll ever know about it is if you find it in yourself and then you share it with us. So don't be afraid to do that. That would be my last thing. Just don't stop. You'll stumble, you'll have setbacks, but don't stop. Just keep reaching for that and finding that beautiful, welcoming openness of the truth that's coming toward you.
Right outside my office door, I have this is a printout, like a basic printout, but it's a line from Hafiz, and I'm going to misquote it, but it goes something like, I wish I could show you in your moment of darkness the stunning light of your own being.
Yeah.
And I have there just for that encouragement if someone needs it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate everything. And thanks to everyone listening.
Thank you.